Sometimes the best things in life cost exactly $1. When Clara Ellington walked into that courthouse with dust on her boots and desperation in her heart, she had no idea she was about to make a purchase that would change everything she thought she knew about value, courage, and the kind of partnership that can save your life. Clara had been drifting for over a year, moving from town to town across the Western Territories, taking whatever work she could find and sleeping wherever someone would let her. Her mare, Silver, was as road-weary as she was. But Clara had learned to hold her head high even when her pockets were empty, because showing weakness in these rough frontier towns was an invitation for trouble she couldn't afford. Cottonwood Creek wasn't much to look at. Just another collection of sun-bleached buildings huddled together against the endless sky, the kind of place Clara had passed through a dozen times before. She tied Silver outside what looked like a saloon and asked a young boy whittling on a bench where she might find work. He pocketed the penny she gave him and pointed toward the courthouse. "Most folks around here don't hire women for ranch work," he said, not unkindly. "But you might find something posted on the board." The courthouse was far too grand for such a modest town. Clara climbed the steps and found the public notice board just inside, her eyes scanning past wanted posters and auction announcements. That's when she saw it. A notice so unusual she had to read it 3 times to believe it was real. Property available. Willow Creek Ranch. Approximately 300 acres with structures included. Sale price, $1. Property sold as is. Buyer assumes all liability. Clara's heart started pounding. This had to be a mistake or some kind of cruel joke. Nobody sold a ranch for $1. But even as skepticism warred with hope in her chest, her feet were already carrying her toward the county clerk's office. The clerk was a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up when Clara entered, his expression shifting to slight discomfort when he realized she was alone. "The ranch listing on the board," Clara said. "The one for $1. Is that legitimate?" The clerk sighed and removed his glasses, cleaning them with a handkerchief. "It is, though I'll save us both time by being honest. That property has a dark history. 3 families have tried to make it work in the past 5 years. None lasted more than a season. The land itself is decent enough, but something about the place drives people away. Accidents. Bad luck. Strange occurrences. The county just wants someone to take responsibility for it and pay the taxes going forward." "What kind of strange occurrences?" Clara asked, leaning forward. "Animals spooked for no reason. Tools disappearing. Sounds in the night. The last family claimed they saw shadows moving when nothing was there." He shrugged. "Personally, I think it's nonsense. But superstition runs deep out here, and now nobody wants to touch the place." Clara felt something settle in her chest. "I'll take it." The clerk blinked. "You're serious. Dead serious. I have $1. You have a deed. Seems straightforward to me." 20 minutes later, Clara walked out of that courthouse with a document bearing her name and the legal description of 300 acres she'd never laid eyes on. Her hands trembled as she folded the deed and tucked it into her shirt. She owned land. After years of drifting, of working for others and sleeping under borrowed roofs, she finally had something that belonged to her alone, even if it might be cursed. The ride to Willow Creek Ranch took longer than expected. The clerk's directions led her west, then north, along a barely visible trail that wound through scrub brush and rocky outcroppings. The landscape grew increasingly isolated, signs of human habitation fading with each mile. When the ranch finally came into view in the late afternoon light, Clara's first reaction was disappointment so sharp it felt physical. The main house sagged in the middle like a tired horse. The porch was missing boards. The barn listed noticeably to one side. Fencing lay in tangles across what might have once been pastures, and tumbleweeds had piled against every vertical surface. It was the sorriest piece of property Clara had ever seen. It was also hers. She dismounted and stood for a long moment, taking it all in. Silver stamped impatiently, eager for water and rest. Clara led her mare toward what she hoped was a functioning well near the house. and was relieved when the pump creaked to life after several hard pulls. The water that eventually sputtered out was cold and clear. At least that was something. While Silver drank, Clara approached the house. The front door hung partially open, swaying slightly in the breeze. She pushed it wider and stepped inside, waiting for her eyes to adjust to the dim interior. The place smelled of dust and abandonment. Furniture remained, a table, chairs, an iron bed frame, all covered in thick grime. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the roof. It was depressing. But it wasn't hopeless. After settling Silver with some grain she'd bought in town, Clara decided to inspect the barn before darkness fell. The structure was larger than it appeared from a distance, with multiple stalls and a loft. Most of the stalls were empty and thick with cobwebs. But as Clara moved deeper into the barn, something made her stop. Fresh manure. Not old and dried, but recent. Within the last day or two. Her hand moved instinctively to the pistol at her hip. If someone's in here, show yourself. I'm the new owner, and I'm armed. The response was immediate and unexpected. A deep rumbling snort from the last stall, followed by the sound of something large moving in the darkness. Clara approached cautiously. When recognition finally came, her breath caught. A horse stood in the stall, watching her with an intensity that was almost unnerving. But this wasn't some gentle farm horse or abandoned nag. This animal was massive, easily the largest horse Clara had ever seen up close. In the dim light, his coat appeared to be a deep reddish-brown, almost like burnished rust. What struck Clara most was the intelligence in his eyes. This horse was studying her just as carefully as she was studying him, assessing whether she represented threat or opportunity. "Well," Clara said softly. "I wasn't expecting company." The horse's ears flicked toward her voice, but he didn't move closer or retreat. He simply watched and waited. Clara could see he was in rough shape. His ribs were too prominent. His coat was matted with burrs and mud. His hooves looked like they hadn't been trimmed in months. But underneath the neglect was an animal of remarkable quality. Powerful hindquarters, a deep chest, a refined head that spoke of good breeding somewhere in his lineage. "How long have you been here?" Clara asked, keeping her voice low and calm. "Did the last owners just abandon you?" The horse snorted again, softer this time. Clara backed away slowly. "All right. I'm going to get myself settled for the night. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do about you." That night, Clara lay on the dusty floor wrapped in her bedroll, too exhausted to do more than minimal cleaning. Through the broken roof, she could see stars scattered across the black sky. From the barn, she occasionally heard sounds of movement, her mysterious companion making his presence known. Clara's mind churned with questions. Who owned this horse? Had he been left behind deliberately or by accident? How had he survived on his own for what must have been weeks or months? And most pressingly, what was she supposed to do about him? She had no legal claim to the animal. Technically, he might belong to the previous owners. Taking possession of him could constitute horse theft, which was still a hanging offense in some places. But as Clara stared up at the stars, she felt a strange certainty settling over her. She and that horse were meant to find each other. Both abandoned. Both surviving against the odds. Both too stubborn to quit even when circumstances said they should. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd start earning his trust. Whatever his story was, they were in this together now. Dawn came too early. Clara dragged herself upright, every muscle protesting. Her first priority was getting a fire going and making coffee strong enough to wake the dead. After choking down some hardtack and dried beef, Clara filled a bucket with water and headed to the barn. Silver nickered a greeting, but Clara's attention was on the last stall where the big rust-colored horse waited. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly. His coat really was a remarkable shade, like a new penny left in the sun. His mane and tail, though tangled, were long and full. Those dark, knowing eyes tracked her every movement. "Good morning," Clara said quietly. "I've brought you some water. I'll set it right here." She placed the bucket just outside the stall, within his reach but not so close he'd feel cornered. The horse eyed the bucket but made no move toward it while she was near. Clara grabbed a pitchfork and began mucking out Silver's stall, keeping up a steady stream of conversation. "I figure we should get properly introduced. My name's Clara Ellington. I bought this place yesterday, though calling it a purchase seems generous when it only cost $1. I'm guessing you've been here longer than me. Got a name?" She worked methodically, filling a wheelbarrow with old straw. When she returned, she noticed the big horse had moved closer to the water bucket, though he still hadn't drunk from it. "I know you don't trust me yet," Clara continued. "That's smart. Trust should be earned, not given freely. But here's my situation. I can't keep calling you horse, or you. Seems disrespectful. So I'm going to give you a name, at least temporarily. How about Rusty? Because of your coat. Simple, but it fits." The horse's ears swiveled toward her voice, and Clara chose to interpret that as acceptance. Over the next several hours, she worked on making the barn more livable for both horses. She found hay in the loft that was still dry and sweet-smelling. She cleaned and filled water troughs. She repaired a broken gate. And all the while, she talked to Rusty, letting him get used to her voice, her scent, her presence. If this story is touching your heart, please share it with someone who understands that the most valuable partnerships aren't bought, they're built on trust, patience, and showing up every single day. By mid-afternoon, Rusty had drunk the water she'd left and had even accepted a small offering of hay, though he still wouldn't let her within 10 feet of him. Progress. Slow, but progress. The next week fell into a rhythm. Clara would wake with the sun, tend to both horses, then spend her days working on urgent repairs. The house needed the most attention, patching the roof, sweeping out months of debris, making the place minimally habitable. But every morning and evening, she made time for Rusty. She'd bring him fresh water and hay, clean around his stall, and talk to him about her day, her plans, her past. She told him about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about losing her parents to fever, about the years of drifting, never quite finding where she belonged. Rusty listened with those intelligent eyes, never approaching but never fleeing either. It was a careful dance between two weary souls, each waiting for the other to make the first move toward real connection. The breakthrough came on the 8th day. Clara had been singing while she worked, an old hymn her mother used to hum. She wasn't paying attention to Rusty's stall, focused instead on replacing a broken board. She didn't notice Rusty had left his stall until she turned around and found him standing less than 5 feet away. His head lowered, his ears forward with curiosity rather than aggression. Clara froze, hardly daring to breathe. They stood like that for what felt like an eternity. Woman and horse, each evaluating the other. Then Clara did something that surprised even herself. She sat down on the barn floor, making herself smaller, less threatening. She resumed singing, soft and low, keeping her hands visible and relaxed. Rusty took one step forward. Then another. Then he stretched his neck out and touched his nose to Clara's outstretched hand. "Hello, Rusty," Clara whispered, tears unexpectedly stinging her eyes. "It's good to finally meet you properly." After that day, everything changed. Rusty began following Clara around the property, keeping a respectful distance but clearly interested in what she was doing. He'd whinny when he heard her voice in the morning. He started accepting treats, apples she'd bought in town, carefully cut into pieces. Most significantly, he allowed her to touch him. At first just his neck and shoulders, always with slow, deliberate movements that gave him time to move away if he chose. But gradually, as trust built between them, Clara was able to run her hands over his entire body, assessing his condition. What she found concerned her. Beyond the obvious malnutrition and neglected hooves, Rusty had old scars. Rope burns on his pasterns. What looked like whip marks on his hindquarters. A poorly healed injury on his left foreleg. Someone had treated this magnificent animal badly, and Clara felt anger kindle in her chest. "Nobody's going to hurt you again," she promised him one evening as she carefully worked tangles out of his mane. "Not while I'm here." The work of transforming the ranch was slow and often discouraging. Clara quickly realized her limited funds wouldn't stretch far enough. She made do with what she could salvage, trade for, or improvise. On one of her trips to town, Clara stopped at the general store and found herself face to face with the owner, a weathered man named Mr. Briggs. "You're the woman who bought the Willow Creek place," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's right. For $1. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. "The best dollar I ever spent," Clara replied evenly. Briggs studied her for a long moment. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. Word of advice, some of the ranchers around here aren't happy about a woman trying to run a property on her own. They think it makes them look bad. Watch yourself." Clara felt a chill despite the warm day. "Thanks for the warning." As she loaded her supplies onto Silver, a group of men emerged from the saloon across the street. One of them, a stocky man with a red face, called out to her. "That's her, boys. The lady rancher." Laughter followed his words, ugly and mocking. Clara kept her eyes forward and her hands steady, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. But as she rode out of town, she could feel their eyes on her back like a physical weight. The first real threat came 2 weeks later. Clara had been working near the house when Rusty suddenly appeared, his entire body tense, his ears pinned back. He positioned himself between Clara and the road, clearly agitated by something she couldn't yet see. Then she heard it, approaching riders. 3 men on horseback emerged over the rise, riding onto her property with the casual arrogance of people who didn't expect to be challenged. Clara recognized the red-faced man from town. She straightened up and waited. Rusty stayed close to her side, his body practically vibrating with tension. The riders stopped about 20 feet away. "Afternoon," the red-faced man said, his tone falsely jovial. "Name's Tom Hackett. We own property adjacent to yours." "Mr. Hackett," Clara nodded. "What can I do for you?" "See, this land you bought, it's cursed. You're going to fail, same as everyone else. So we're here to make you a fair offer. We'll take the property off your hands for $20. That's 20 times what you paid." Clara felt Rusty shift beside her, moving even closer. "The property isn't for sale at any price." Hackett's smile faded. "Don't be stupid about this. A woman alone can't run a ranch. Winter's coming. You'll be begging us to take it off your hands in a few months. Might as well sell now." "I appreciate your concern," Clara said, her voice cold as winter steel. "But my answer is no. This is my land, legally purchased. If you have no other business here, I'd appreciate you leaving." One of the other men, younger and meaner looking than Hackett, spat in the dirt. "That's a fine-looking horse you got there. Wouldn't want anything to happen to him." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara's hand drifted toward her hip where her pistol rested. The men noticed. Hackett held up a hand. "No need for unpleasantness. But you think about our offer, Miss Ellington. Things have a way of going wrong for people who don't have friends out here." They turned their horses and rode away, but Clara knew this wasn't over. "There's going to be trouble," she said quietly, resting a hand on Rusty's neck. "Both of us need to be careful now." The harassment escalated in small ways over the following weeks. Tools disappeared. A section of fence she'd just repaired was torn down overnight. She found boot prints near the barn one morning, evidence someone had been creeping around while she slept. Most disturbing was the morning she found a dead coyote hanging from her gate. A clear message. Clara cut it down and buried it, her jaw set with determination. She'd survived too much to be scared off now. Rusty became increasingly protective during this period. He'd position himself between Clara and any potential threats, his ears constantly swiveling to catch sounds she couldn't hear. At night, he'd stay near the house rather than in the barn, a self-appointed guardian. One evening, as Clara sat on the porch cleaning her rifle, Rusty stood nearby, surveying their small kingdom. "You know what I think," Clara said aloud. I think someone hurt you badly before you came here. That's why you were so wary. And I think maybe you're protecting me because you understand what it's like to need protection." Rusty turned his head to look at her, and Clara felt certain he understood every word. "We're going to make it through this," she continued. "Together. Because neither of us has anywhere else to go, and sometimes that's the best reason to fight." The situation came to a head on a moonless night in late September. Clara was awakened by Rusty's warning call, a sharp, piercing whinny unlike anything she'd heard from him before. She grabbed her rifle and burst out of the house to find Rusty standing in the yard, facing toward the eastern pasture where an orange glow was growing against the dark sky. Fire. She could see figures on horseback silhouetted against the flames, riding in circles to spread the blaze. Clara fired a shot into the air. The riders scattered, but the fire continued to grow, consuming the dry grass with terrifying speed. For the next 2 hours, Clara fought the blaze with everything she had. She hauled bucket after bucket of water. She beat at flames with wet burlap sacks. She dug fire breaks with a shovel. And Rusty was there beside her through it all. He used his hooves to stamp out smaller flames. He stayed close enough that Clara could grab his mane when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. He was her partner in every sense, fighting for their home with the same desperation she felt. When the fire finally burned itself out, Clara collapsed in the dirt, coughing and covered in soot. About 5 acres had been destroyed, but the buildings were safe. Rusty lowered his head to nuzzle her shoulder, and Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, too exhausted even for tears. "We survived," she rasped. "But they're not going to stop. We can't fight this alone." The next morning, Clara rode into town and went straight to the sheriff's office. She filed a formal complaint against Tom Hackett, detailing every incident. The sheriff listened with an expression that told Clara he wasn't going to do anything. "You got proof Hackett was involved?" "I saw riders. 3 of them. Same number that visited my property to threaten me. Seeing riders ain't proof of who they were." He shrugged. "My advice: sell the property and move on." Clara left feeling more alone than ever. The law wouldn't protect her. She was on her own. At the general store, Mr. Briggs called her over. He glanced around to make sure they were alone. "I heard about the fire. I'm sorry. The sheriff won't do anything." Briggs nodded grimly. "Hackett has friends. But I want you to know there are people here who admire what you're trying to do." He pulled out a box of ammunition and set it on the counter. "This is on the house. We might not be able to help openly, but we're watching." It wasn't much, but it was something. Clara spent the following days preparing. She created better sightlines around the property. She positioned buckets of water at strategic points. She made sure her weapons were cleaned, loaded, and within easy reach. "I don't have the right to ask you to risk yourself for me," she told Rusty one evening. "You don't owe me anything. If you want to run when the trouble comes, I'll understand." Rusty turned his head and looked at her with those impossibly knowing eyes. "All right then," Clara whispered. "We'll face it together." The attack came 3 nights later. The sound of hoofbeats woke her, not 3 riders this time, but at least 6. They came from multiple directions simultaneously. Torches arced through the air, landing near the barn, the house, the pasture. Gunshots cracked through the night. Clara returned fire, aiming for the torches. She managed to extinguish one, then another. But there were too many. That's when Rusty entered the fight. The big stallion burst from his position with a battle cry that sent chills down Clara's spine. He charged directly at a cluster of riders, his size and speed and sheer fury scattering their horses in panic. One rider was thrown. Another's horse bolted. Clara used the distraction to pick off more torches. She and Rusty worked in concert, each covering the other's weaknesses. But they were still outnumbered and exhausted. Then Clara heard the most beautiful sound in the world, more hoofbeats approaching, but from the direction of town. Mr. Briggs appeared first, a shotgun across his saddle. Behind him came 4 more townspeople, all armed, all ready to fight. "For Miss Ellington!" Briggs shouted. The tide turned immediately. Hackett's men, faced with unexpected opposition, broke and ran. Within minutes, the property was clear. Clara stumbled out onto the porch. Rusty limped toward her, and she saw with horror that he'd been grazed by a bullet across his shoulder. It wasn't deep, but blood matted his coat. "You're hurt," she said, her voice breaking. Rusty pressed his head against her chest, his breathing labored but steady. Briggs approached. "That's one hell of a horse you've got there, Miss Ellington." Clara looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. All of you. I thought no one would come." "You gave us something to believe in," Briggs said simply. "A woman fighting alone against men who thought power gave them rights. Some of us remembered what it was like to stand up for what's right." After they left, Clara tended to Rusty's wound, cleaning and bandaging it as best she could. He stood patiently through her ministrations. "We won," she told him softly. "But more than that, we proved something. We proved that determination and partnership can overcome almost anything." In the aftermath of that night, everything changed. Word spread about the battle and about the rust-colored stallion who'd fought alongside his owner. People who'd previously ignored Clara now tipped their hats. Ranchers started offering advice and assistance. Hackett and his associates left the territory entirely. With support from neighbors and her own relentless work ethic, Clara transformed the ranch over the following year. Fences were repaired. Buildings received proper maintenance. She built up a small herd of cattle, acquired chickens and a milk cow, even planted a garden that actually produced food. But through all of it, Rusty remained the heart of everything she built. He was her transportation, her partner in working the cattle, her early warning system, and most importantly, her friend through the lonely hours and difficult decisions. Clara never discovered Rusty's full history, who'd owned him before, where he'd come from, how he'd ended up abandoned at Willow Creek Ranch. In some ways, it didn't matter. What mattered was that 2 lost souls had found each other when they both needed it most. On a spring morning, almost 2 years after she'd bought the ranch, Clara stood on her front porch with coffee, watching Rusty graze in the lush green pasture. The scars from the fire had healed. The ranch had become profitable, not wealthy, but sustainable and growing. But more than financial success, Clara had found something she hadn't even known she was searching for: a sense of belonging. Rusty lifted his head and looked toward the porch, his ears pricked forward. Clara could see the contentment in his posture. He'd filled out beautifully, his rust-colored coat gleaming in the sunlight. "Come here, boy," Clara called. Rusty trotted over, and Clara met him at the steps. She wrapped her arms around his massive neck, breathing in his familiar scent. "You know what the best part of buying this place was?" she asked. "It wasn't the land, even though I love every acre. It wasn't proving the doubters wrong, though that was satisfying. It was finding you. You showed me that family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the souls you choose to stand beside when everything goes wrong." Rusty's response was to rest his chin on her shoulder, a gesture that had become their private language for understanding and affection. Clara smiled and stroked his neck. "We built something here, you and I. Something that's going to last. And whatever comes next, we'll face it the same way we faced everything else, together." The dollar Clara Ellington spent at that courthouse was the best investment she ever made. Not because of the land it purchased, but because of the horse who was waiting in the barn and the life they built together against all odds. Sometimes the most valuable things cost almost nothing. Sometimes a curse is really a blessing in disguise. And sometimes a woman and a horse can prove that determination, trust, and partnership are more powerful than any obstacle. If Clara and Rusty's story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Have you ever had a connection with a horse that changed your life? Share your story in the comments. We love hearing from you. And subscribe for more incredible tales of the unbreakable bonds between horses and the humans whose lives they transform. Remember, Sometimes the most valuable partnerships cost nothing but trust and determination. Until next time, keep believing in the power of these magnificent creatures.